Hello to all. Here today with a bit of a post-grind analysis of the Sovetsky Soyuz. I have since moved on from the Soyuz to the Kremlin for quite some time, so we're back at it with a regular captain, no Kuznetsov safety net for this Soyuz now, since that will be more typical for players who are just now grinding the Soviet cruiser or Soviet battleship line without access to Kuznetsov, since he is a rather expensive 175,000 coal in the armory. So I'm grinding her with a 13-point captain. I did hold on to my Soyuz because I did greatly enjoy my Soyuz experience. Anyhow, looking at this match, we're in a tier 9 game. Sorry about the audio feedback in the background. Bit of work stuff going on in the backdrop. Anyhow, we're in a pure tier 9 match. We're on the map the Atlantic. Mode's domination, and there's plenty of food to deal with here, but there's also notably a Benham and 2 Kitakazes, which are going to be very annoying. Now the Sovetsky Soyuz is the first of the, I guess, true high-tier Soviet battleships. The Vladivostok gives you a bit of a taste, introducing you to 32mm armor on the extremities plating, but the Soyuz is the first to have not only the 60mm midsection, which is resistant to basically all forms of high explosive except for certain very niche cases such as IFHE Hindenburg or IFHE Yoshino, or Kronstadt, or Stalingrad, or those large cruisers of IFHE or British battleships. But more or less, the 60mm midsection is fairly resistant to high explosive fire. In addition, you also get access to the fast turret traverse found on high-tier Soviet battleships, which means that you can actually get away without running expert marksman. And indeed, my 13-point captain only has one 2-point skill, which I put into Adrenaline Rush. Pretty wide salvo there on the bow in Venom, so it didn't get a good salvo, but hopefully my Ostergotland, the new Pan-European destroyer, can put some shells into him with his rapid-firing 120mm guns and put him out of commission, and indeed that does occur. So the Sovetsky Soyuz, of course, does share that standard Soviet dispersion pattern. I wanted to take a pot shot at that Georgia, but he's using his speed boost, so he's going to get into the gap before I can get my Soyuz out and able to fire. Now the Soyuz does do about 28 knots, so not the fastest, but fairly respectable. Going to see if I can get a shot off on the Buffalo. With the Soviet dispersion, she's not the most accurate at ranges like 17.5 kilometers, but the penetration remains very high with her high velocity 406mm guns. Same caliber as that of the Vladivostok which precedes her, but just a different gun with a different shell. Georgia approaching. Now I do have heavy armor, however I don't have any secondaries or anything, and the Soyuz actually has a fairly exposed citadel, which means if you get broadside you will get punished, unlike some of the memes you may have seen, where the Soyuz is kind of, or if the Kremlin's kind of just completely broadside and still fairly indestructible. The Soyuz does not quite share this trait. Her belt armor is not nearly so thick. So with the Missouri in that position, I am going to have to push closer to this rock here in the north in order to shield myself from his high arcing American shells. There's Nabuki on the other side of this, but I'm just going to hold the corner against him and the Georgia at this point. Slowing to a stop. Georgia giving quite a bit broadside, but the Ibuki is the one I want. Let's see if I can get my tight dispersion Soviet shells. You can see a nice flat dispersion and a nice double citadel and engine knockout. I'm not going to do anything other than take my damage control for now. My allied Soyuz is bravely charging in. There's almost assuredly Ibuki torpedoes coming toward my position. Ibuki has 25mm strips and a tiny 30mm strip with which he can bounce my shells, but for the most part he can't. Looks like he's turning out for some reason. Let's see if I can catch him in the turn with my nice flat frontal salvo, and that's one Ibuki down after giving a foolish amount of broadside. My allied Soyuz is passing on the left. Well, I guess that's technically the Georgia's right, but passing on my left. So I'm going to approach the Georgia from his right. I can't really help the Soyuz from this position. He's not giving that much broadside, so maybe I can help the Missouri, who's giving a large amount of broad instead. Remember, I have those high velocity 16s. Not quite as good of a salvo. Oh, my Soyuz does manage to get the drive-by somehow. Perhaps maybe out-rotating the Georgia's relatively sluggish turrets. There are the Ibuki torpedoes that I mentioned, but we already anticipated them coming, so we reversed a little bit, and now at this point we can just easily maneuver around them. Now once this Missouri is dealt with, I am going to have to turn back, so I'm actually just going to full reverse here because I don't want to push around the island because it's going to take forever. I do ricochet 2 of my shells off the side of his angled hull. My Soyuz has pulled up to a stop and the Missouri, I guess, is trying to go for a drive-by. I'm going to see if I can help him by knocking out some guns at this point because I can't really kill the Missouri when he's disangled in. Missouri going for the drive-by. Oh, he does get the drive-by successfully. But because of the thick armor and my 406s, which don't overmatch, that's a talent reserved only for the Missouri, or Musashi and Yamato and the likes of that. I'm going to try to shoot the side of the gun. My shells did ricochet off the bow, however. So let's see. He might try to go for a ram, but given his recent drive-by, I believe he might just try for a drive-by. He's getting quite a bit of broadside here, or my turrets reverse very quickly. And he forces me forward, but he wasn't quite ready to fire off the guns, so just a quick trigger squeeze at the right moment once I'm sure he's not going to bounce my shells. Gives me a nice second kill and another 2 citadels. I was going to reverse out, as I mentioned, because I didn't want to go around this rock, but we ended up having to go forward to kind of break the drive-by attempt from the Missouri. The other Soyuz seems a bit unhappy that he had to take the 2 versus 1 by himself, but I got to put in some free damage, and he didn't. So what do I care? No one told him to opt into that 1 versus 1. He could have just reversed like I did. Firing off my frontal guns, notice how I got the terrain warning indicator, and notice how the Soyuz has excellent forward firing angles. Pretty long range shot, but I do manage to get an overpenetration. You can see the velocity of the shells is quite a bit higher than that of the Vladivostok. Now, as I mentioned, the Soyuz is not the fastest of battleships. Not exactly a fast battleship design. She does about 28 knots. So it's more than likely that the rest of this game is going to be a very long lug toward the cap. Another weakness of the Soviet battleships is, of course, their short range, so I am limited to 19.4, even fully upgraded. I don't have access to a spotter plane, I instead only have a fighter. You can see that dispersion getting quite wide at range. Do still manage to score an over-penetrating hit at 19 kilometers, however, thanks to the dispersion kind of spraying my shells, which probably otherwise would have missed, into that Buffalo's side. Thus far, a fairly unimpressive game, the Ibuki just donating himself over to me. And then just a very simple thwarting of the Missouri's attempt to drive by me after he did that to my Soyuz, who took on the Georgia. Ooh, Buffalo bowing in. Now, if you've noticed the past spreads, you get that nice horizontal axis spread onto the Soviet shells. Do manage to clip him with 1 on the nose, so hitting things in the broadside is much easier than hitting nose-in targets with these Russian battleships, thanks to that dispersion pattern. The ellipse is rather horizontal rather than the more circular ellipse that American battleship players will be more used to, for example. Very much a modified German spread. Kitakaze at 18 kilometers or a Jutland at 13. I'm going to favor the Jutland, obviously, because I am more accurate at closer ranges, thanks to that special Soviet spread. Kind of trying to predict which way he's going to turn. I'm hoping he's going to turn slightly out to the side, but thanks to the... oh, there's the turn I was trying to predict, and he does turn into a shell, and I catch my third kill as a result. Taking advantage of that elliptical spread that I was just talking about in order to frag that Utland. And as before, as I was talking about the short range of the Soyuz, because we spawned in the north and pushed into the northern corner, because this game has not been particularly close, we are a long way out from the fight now. Sitting at a really low damage score, we've only really been fighting for about a minute in terms of actual game time. I'm gonna see if I can push down toward this line and this Soyuz and convince them to fight. They probably are gonna push toward this cap though with what's left of their HP, so maybe it might be better to just try and meet them on the other side. They are gonna fight a rune from the looks of it. The line, however, might approach this gap or might just approach me if I just plunge down, because he's turning in. Enemy Soyuz is finally on the edge of my range. Now remember, my accuracy at this range is poor, but my penetration power remains high. The Soyuz has very high velocity, 406mm guns. Pretty ugly spread at that range, as you note. But I'm happy enough just to have something to shoot at. Now, looking through the scope, they're both fairly angled, but based on minimap, this lead ship is much less angled, so that's the Lion. So we're gonna focus on him. I still have all my damage control charges and 3 of my 4 heals. Lion re-angles in. Note how he's now pretty much bow into me, based on minimap angle, which leads to ricochets. However, the Lion has flat British turret faces, which means I can go for the guns. And with these high velocity shells, I can inflict some pretty nasty damage onto turret face. Pretty wide spread there, kind of straddling on either side of the ship. The Soyuz, unlike the Kremlin, doesn't quite have that improved sigma, still sitting on a 1.7 sigma, so unlike the 1.8 now of the Kremlin, she used at 1.9, 1.85 for a very short period as well. I don't have anything like that. Giving quite a bit of broadside. I'm still angled per se, as you can see, but I can be punished with some pen damage if I'm not careful, and the Lion's probably just going to shoot HE to be honest, so. Still haven't done any damage in my past 3 salvos. Shooting AP in the bow and targets. I could have probably switched to HE if I wanted to. I'm just waiting for one of them to show some side. They're going to have to turn eventually. That, or they can just slowly be whittled down by my teammates by staying bow in. Maybe I can get a superstructure kill here. Oh, not quite. We are going to point out. But as you witnessed, the Soyuz remains very powerful. Even in the metagame, probably was this like 8 months later now? Almost a year, perhaps? So still a dominant force at tier 9. World of Warships client kicking me out as usual, because World of Warships client is a piece of trash. 81,000 damage, very unambitious. You can see of the 34 shells we landed, only 21 of them actually inflicted damage, and half of those were overpens. So that does happen when you have high velocity guns. 2 incaps, 3 kills, 5 sits, 1 defender ribbon, and 6 target hits. Now do note that we spent most of the game offline, so as a result, we had our kind of 2 minutes of fun, and then our round kind of ended, but it was good enough to score. Second from the top, this enemy team did not offer very much resistance. So a very short game in terms of actual action time, but it did demonstrate the strengths and weaknesses. As you can see, 13-point captain. And then modules are very simple. Main armaments, damage control, aiming systems, damage control again, concealment, and then reload. And then captain-wise, just 13 points, priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, basics of fire prevention, and then basics of survivability. Now, if you're intending to use your captain as a hybrid and maybe also use him on Stalingrad, instead of taking basics, often what people will do will take expert marksman and expert loader. But if you're using the captain purely for Soviet battleships, Soviet high-tier battleships, so that's the Sovetsky Soyuz that you see here, and the Kremlin as well, do not require expert marksman. That frees up 2 extra points, so if you have something like Kuznetsov with the improved jack of all trades, that's typically where the 2 points will go. That was a rather disappointing match in spite of the minute and a half or so of action up top with the Georgia, Missouri, Ibuki scrap. So let's see if we can find something a bit more palatable for viewership. I actually happen to like the Sovetsky Soyuz quite a bit, if you can't tell already. I think she's a fantastic tier 9 and could potentially have been made into a tier 10 ship if Wargaming so wanted to. I think the 457s of the Kremlin are a bit too egregious, along with her kind of absurd armor and health pool. So the Soyuz with a couple of improvements could probably stand toe-to-toe. Now this next map is on Islands of Ice, and it's going to be Epicenter, so there's going to be some brawling involved, I'm sure. There's also a carrier, but it's just a tier 8, thankfully. There's a Graf Zeppelin, however. Graf Zeppelin has AP bombs, which are fairly effective against both the Soyuz and the Kremlin that comes after her. All Soviet battleships are pretty much vulnerable to armor-piercing munitions from aircraft. And the Soyuz, unlike the Kremlin, has pretty bad AA. You can see here she has a kind of World War, pre-interwar period AA, so she has these 150s, but they're not dual purpose, and then she has individual AA mounts, but they're kind of old. So her AA is pretty poor, honestly. I'm going to push along the border at first, but eventually, probably once we crest this first rock, I am going to push in towards the center. It kind of depends. Now, if I was the FDG, I'd probably just take a more central route in the first place, but because I'm on the border spawn, I am going to ride the border for a brief period before pushing in towards the epicenter. So this game we might be able to make use of our fighter consumable. This is something that you lose when you move on to the Kremlin. The Kremlin only has her damage control with limited uses and her heal. But overall, this should be an interesting match. Now, for Islands of Ice Epicenter, there does tend to be snowstorms that pop up as the match progresses, so we will see. For now, it looks like we have clear skies and sunny days, so no dreary snowstorm to dampen the mood. You can see here the fast traverse of the 406 is very easily keeping up with my potential turning circle. As a Soviet battleship, the Sovetsky Soyuz is a bit of a thunder chunker. Last game, we were not stressed at all in terms of our tanking capabilities. We didn't even have to pop a damage control, really. We just fought against some foolish ships which pushed a corner and then died instantly, and then our game was over. So hopefully this game we can put our tanking to some use. There's a Daring in the distance, one of the strongest silver ships in the game now, probably one of the strongest tier 10 destroyers in the game at this moment, thanks to the changes to IFHE, meaning she no longer needs it in order to penetrate destroyers, which means you don't typically include it in a build. Seattle also pushing center with that Daring, and that will be our target. Our shells onto the Daring missed. Oh, he's smoking up, however, which will give the Seattle some shield in terms of vision. In the distance we see a Roma. He's fairly flat. Look, based on our relative angle, we should be able to get full pens if we can get spawning again. Roma is fairly stealthy. There's also a North Carolina, which is quite clearly giving a large amount of broadside. On a different angle, give him a fair amount of lead, even with the high velocity shells. He is quite distant. He's outside our optimum range of about 15 kilometers or less, but the shells still find our mark and do a nice chunk of 7k pen damage. Looks like there's some HE headed my way. I'm gonna set one fire, gonna adjust my angle. There's a Stalingrad on the corner there, so I cannot angle too much. Remember, the Stalingrad has enormous amounts of range. My Yugmo catches a Daring torpedo, unfortunately. So the Stalingrad on this flank is going to pose a problem to me because I'm not going to be able to turn in and face that Roma in the center, for example. very well. Roma's shooting HE for some reason, even though the Italian HE is actually awful. He's reversing, so I'm just aiming right at his section. I get a second fire set onto me, so I'm just going to pop a damage control charge. And the Roma shows enough broadside so that even just outside my optimum range, he takes a nice citadel. He's going to take some more torps from the Yugmo who died, and that's going to finish him off. So that's what the battleship threat dealt with. There's still the North Carolina that I'm already angled against, but the Stalingrad, whether or not he's here or not, is going to force me to show a significant amount of angle. Some more HE spam being shoved my way, but that's fine. My damage control will be up soon if they set more fires, and the unangled North Carolina takes an easy citadel even outside of optimum range. Remember, even though the Soyuz is relatively inaccurate, I wouldn't say actually inaccurate, outside her optimum range she still has an enormous amount of penetration power, and a relatively thinly armored tier 8 battleship like the NCAL will take a large amount of damage. One overpen on the Seattle. Remember, high velocity guns on a thinly armored Seattle means, well, you're going to have a tough time sticking shells into the Citadel. There we get a 2-gun straddle, reversing out of what are probably the Daring's torpedoes. Staying fairly distant, you'll note. I'm just very afraid of that Stalingrad corner holding. Angled Seattle's actually a better target for me, even though he's increased the range. Torpedoes are going to sail past where I was now. How are our shells doing? High velocity shells make leading shots very, very simple. And even without any citadels, nice 8K salvo into Seattle. Gonna push forward a little bit. The NCAL has opened up the range. The Stalingrad is clearly here, but just holding that corner. Gonna see if I can put some shots into this 2K HP Daring. Oh, he dies. Briefly shooting at some planes. Gonna push down the side. We don't have central control yet. But again, it's hard for me to push center while the Stalingrad is holding me kind of hostage. And that Stalingrad might actually be the Sovetsky Soyuz from last game. He's in the same clan. I don't remember his name. You can check that after the game. That would be pretty interesting. But since he was complaining about me not helping him last game, it would be pretty funny if it was. Just gonna run at him, more or less. I do want to kill this NCAL so I can turn to face him. The NCAL will be the last real threat. The Musashi will be the other AP threat that could potentially challenge me at this moment. I am going to get harassed by the carrier as I push in toward the Stalingrad because I'm also threatening his hull. Graf Zeppelin temporarily engages me. Oh, Musashi I think is shooting me, but I think this also was HE for some reason. So I'm gonna go with a 2-gun engagement into the Stalingrad. But first we're gonna put some shells into this Graf Zeppelin. He's moving fairly slowly, and he's inside my optimum range. Bow in towards the Stalin. Not too afraid of anything else. Gonna see if I can put some pot shots into him. Gonna hold here at this range. Only the Musashi can really threaten me. Okay, the Graf Zeppelin is completely stopped, so aim right under the smoke stack, and he's nice and broadside, so remember that broadside dispersion ellipse I was talking about. I think Stalingrad is reversing, but if he wants to reverse, then I'll just simply threaten his carrier. Pretty ugly dispersion, unfortunately, for the frontal gun salvo. Alright, Seattle's the one threatening me. Gonna ignore that guy for a bit. My reload's coming up. Seattle decides to close to 13 kilometers. Fairly broadside, turning slightly out, so raise the shells up. Remember, I don't have Kuznetsov, so I don't have a safety net here. He turns out and away. Fine, I'll threaten the carrier. My team in the meantime is securing the middle while I'm occupying 2 ships and probably the carrier eventually. I want to stay outside of the Graf Zeppelin's AA range. Looks like I can't quite find the Citadel on the Zeppelin. I'm inside secondary range. Do have to watch. He's about to cross my bow. I'm waiting on the reload for the front guns. Once I fire my rear gun, I will switch over to the Stalin at this point because he's so close. And you can see here my fast turret reverse easily tracking the Stalingrad as my reload comes up. Alright, he's angling in. So shoot the bow. The upper bow of the Stalingrad is 25. Unfortunately, he manages to make it ricochet off to his side instead. Angling in, he has improved American bounce angles. And now we're about to see the clash of titans between the naval legend and the Stalingrad. Now if I survive this trade, I'll have a prize of a Graf Zeppelin. He's slightly angled, trying to bait shots into his angled belt, but you don't want to do that, just shoot his nose. At this close range, I can get pretty large salvos in. Just do the right thing. You can see my armor resisting the HE of the Seattle quite easily. I'm going to reverse out. He seems to have conceded that he does not want to rush. I don't want to rush him either because my citadel is equally exposed as his. I'm full on reversing, tracking his nose. Another 13,000 with 6 full pens. At this point he might pass by, so I reverse in order to hide my citadel. He's trying to go for a drive-by. I want my guns to load before I reconsider. If he rams, he rams. But I'm gonna try for a frontal citadel. Oh, or if he does that, I'm gonna wait. Up damage control. Wait. Still keep waiting. Have to wait for the right angle. Now should be about right. And that should be an easy kill. Remember, my rear gun has been out of commission this whole time. Now let's pick up our prizes. 5k at close range, into Seattle, down to my last heal charge. I'm still under pressure, so I have absolutely no problem with pumping shells into the guy actually damaging me. He switches to AP at close range, which is fairly good. 2k. Good decision on his part. At this range, I'm likely to just overpen him. My allies do hit him and knock out his engine, however. So let's see if we can pick up our prize. Nope. Well, that's fine. Gonna damage control, still have charges left. And there's one last prize on the horizon. Now remember, I was overpenning this completely still Graf Zeppelin, so maybe I need to aim a little higher, try to get his belt. What's more than likely happening is that my shells are just failing to fuse because the Graf Zeppelin is too thinly armored relative to my high-velocity Soyuz shells at this range. Sadly, the Massachusetts is going to take my kill, but we got a full health Stalingrad dev strike, so that'll have to be good enough. The Musashi that was, I think, shooting HE at me crawls away into the distance. And we'll clean up a second game where we don't get to have an exciting duel, but we do show off a calm, disciplined anti-Stalingrad trade in the naval legend herself. Some nice achievements here. Dev Strike, Fireproof, Dreadnought. 178,000 damage, 7 citadels, 58 overall target hits, of which only 5 are ricochets. That would be the 5 on the belt of the Stalin. 1 in cap and 1 kill. Team score wise, top of the scoreboard at 1964. We just held that corner against the Stalingrad. Stalingrad's name is Kapitosvita. So just as a curiosity, let's see if that's the same Soyuz who decided to kill himself on the corner last game on our team. Oh, okay. I think it's just a very similar looking clan, not quite the same. That guy's clan was Storm, this guy's clan is Squall, so different guy, my bad. My bad. But we still did show him up. Anyhow, 2 quick games in the Sovetsky Soyuz, still a fantastic Tier 9, one of my favorites. And honestly, a fantastic silver ship that easily could have been made into a Tier 10 with a bit more of a strengthening to match her statistics to the other Tier 10s. Anyhow, that'll be all for now. Enjoy patch 0.9.2's Norwegian Fjords port, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!